camera, and it says it's in progress. You may want to turn off your camera. Oops, I can't press on, got it. Without further ado, I would like to introduce our speaker. And I hope I don't butcher up your last name too much, Melissa. But we would like to welcome Dr. Melissa Awenowicz. And Melissa is the Assistant Dean in the Department of Assessment and Accreditation at Rowan University. She brings with her a lot of experience as NJACTE site visitor and CAEP site visitor. As you know, the title of her presentation is Understanding CAEP's Guidelines and Sufficient Standards for Assessment, Rubrics, and Surveys. A very important session for all of us that are involved in accreditation or assessment. So welcome, Melissa. We're delighted that you're here with us.
Thank you so much. And I am thrilled to be here with you this afternoon. I'm going to go ahead and share my slides with you and put it into presenter mode. Are you able to see them? Perfect. And I did adapt my title just a little bit this morning as I was thinking through this presentation and who might be listening to me and interacting today. So I did change it and I put CAEP's guidelines in brackets and added, but also really helpful for any assessment, because I know not all of you are going through CAEP assessment or are interested in CAEP assessment. And so even though these guidelines come from CAEP, they really are general guidelines that are beneficial, whether you are going through AQIP or just looking to create some valid, reliable, sound assessments for your courses or your programs. So I don't want anyone here to think that this is just for institutions or programs going through CAEP accreditation, although this does satisfy their requirements. So overarching guidelines and standards, and I do have some links at the end of this presentation, and I'm sure Amy will make this available to you in the future. So the guidelines in general are that all of the components or standards should be addressed individually or in an aggregate form on the assessment. At least 3 cycles of sequential and recent data should be submitted with the assessment, and it should be disaggregated and analyzed. And that's, of course, if you have a sample size greater than 10. 75% of the EPP created assessments should be scored at the minimum level of sufficiency on the indicators that we're going to talk about today. So not all of them have to meet this criteria, though I think that's a good goal. But at least 75% of the assessments that your EPP has created should be scored using this criteria and meet the sufficiency level. And of course, content validity, inter-rater reliability at 0.80 or above, and surveys aligned to the standards that you're using, whether those are CAEP standards, AQIP standards, in-task standards, whatever your assessment is being aligned to. Whenever possible, you want to have multiple indicators or sources of evidence for whatever it is you're measuring. You certainly don't want to use just one piece of evidence to determine if a candidate has knowledge, skills, and proficiencies in a particular area. When you can triangulate data, it makes that case that you're building much stronger. For CAEP, you can include plans. Transition plans, recruitment and retention plans, and phase-in plans for advanced programs. So if you find yourself lacking in data in a particular area, there are some cases when you can submit a plan to indicate how you're going to calculate or collect that data in the very near future. So that, I think, is reassuring that you don't have to have all of your ducks in a row right now. You can submit some plans to develop that data in the very near future. And finally, an overarching guideline is that when you do a survey, your yield should be 20% or above and should be representative of most of your licensure areas. So those are some just overarching guidelines that I think are important to keep in mind. But we're going to go into some specificity with constructing these assessments and analyzing whether or not they meet the minimum level of sufficiency. So the first attribute that you want to look at is, do you include the purpose and the instructions for administration on the assessment? When and how is it going to be administered and to whom? Why are you using this assessment? What's the purpose? And how will you use the results? Are the instructions clear? And is it aligned to appropriate standards? This should be on the instrument itself. I'm going to run through these rather quickly so that we can actually look at an assessment and see how these do or don't play out and what the problems are when you don't see these. The second attribute is the content of the assessment. You want to look and make sure that at least 90% of your indicators, the questions or the items, are consequential, critical, and relevant to the content, knowledge, skills, and proficiencies that you're trying to assess about the candidate. Lashy's validity study works really well here to help determine which ones aren't consequential. If you've used that, that means of determining validity. And if you haven't, a quick Google search will help you find that. And it's a really, really easy way to determine content validity, excuse me, and let you know through some stakeholders and faculty and expert participation, which indicators might not be the most strongest on your assessment. But 95% of them should be consequential. They should be measuring what you're intending to measure. Sometimes you might see on a rubric where it says, it might be mentioning or measuring creativity or grammar. Those may not be considered consequential attributes, for example. The indicators need to be unambiguously descriptive of the knowledge, skills, and proficiencies to be assessed. The alignment to standards should be explicit. Whenever possible, they should be higher level functioning intellectual behaviors. And for advanced standards, at least 3 of the 6 A1.1 competencies should be measured. And that refers to the things like data literacy, if you're familiar with that, collaboration, impacting the community. Was there a question? Attribute 3 is scoring. Each descriptor is well defined with specific criteria and distinguishable characteristics. Each descriptor is developmentally sequenced and provides the candidate with some feedback And feedback is provided in an actionable way, not only to the candidate, but to the program so that they can use it for continuous improvement. The indicators and descriptors should not simply repeat the standard language, but should define actionable performance-based observable behavior skills and proficiencies. And quantities, degrees, vague terms should be avoided. Things like most, some, few, moderate, and even quantitative things like more than 5 examples, or between 4 and 3, or less than 3. So it's not just a checklist that the candidate is doing this a lot of the time, some of the time, and a little bit of the time. It's about quality, not quantity. We see that a lot in rubrics where assessors are just looking for, did they do it often? Did they do it a lot? And so we want to make sure that the rubrics are about quality. Reliability. Are the scorers and assessors trained with the assessment and the instrument in the rubric? Periodically, do you have inter-rater collaboration and training? Calibration, excuse me. Can you provide a reliability coefficient and documentation of training and reliability procedures? And again, with the inter-rater reliability, you can do a number of different reliability forms that can all be looked up on Google, and they are not at all terribly difficult to conduct. Attribute 7 is validity. Minimum content validity is established and a validity coefficient is reported. I mentioned Lashi's. For me, I think that's one of the easiest to do. New assessments are piloted. Plans or descriptions are provided for how assessments will be impacted or amended by the validity studies. It's really not a big deal if your validity study comes back and there are 3 or 4 items that come back as not relevant. So number 3, what are you going to do? Are you still going to keep those on your assessment? Are you going to modify them to make them more relevant? Are you going to eliminate them? That's what number 3 refers to. And 4, there are other types of validity that you can look at, construct validity and predictive reliability, but you don't have to. Surveys have a little bit other distinguishing characteristics. They need to be, dispositions need to be explicitly connected to teaching practices and skills. The indicators and descriptors should be anchored in performance or behavior related to teaching practices. The questions and topics should be aligned with CAEP, in-task, or professional standards. Items need to have single subjects. You don't want compounded indicators. And you should avoid leading questions and questions that call for opinions. And finally, the EPP provides evidence of survey construct validity. Scale choices are qualitatively defined using specific criteria aligned with the key attributes. The feedback to the EPP is actionable, and questions are piloted and modifications are made if necessary. So I know that was a lot in a little bit of time. But hopefully you'll be able to go back and process these items. What I do when I have an assessment, whether I'm an evaluator or whether I am preparing our CAEP review, we actually here at Rowan have our virtual visit in just 10 short days. But I take all of our assessments and I create a chart that looks like this. And across the top, I have all of those indicators that I just went through. And I give a letter to each of them, and I'll show you how I use that. And here's one of our assessments, the ITP Exit Survey of Candidates. I'm sure all of you have such a survey where you give it to your candidates as they exit the program right before they graduate. So what I've done is I've gone through that assessment, and I'll share it with you in a minute. And I check, and I actually annotate it for these characteristics. And if it meets the characteristic, I put a yes in the column. And if it doesn't, I'll put a notation. So here for F, 90% or more judge critical consequential attributes. I put yes because only numbers 29 and 30 don't really judge consequential attributes. And so out of 30, 2 don't, that's 95%. So that's meeting that criteria. Under H, items have single subjects. Well, items 29 and 30 did not. So I put an X there because not all of them do. But it's still at 95%, which I think is pretty good. I, items are more behavioral than opinion. Well, here I have items 25, 27, 29, and 30 are opinion items. I have that in red. I think that's a problem. So I do have that highlighted in red. Items, it says dispositions are related to effective teaching. I have items 21 to 26 relate to teaching and instructional practice. Those are the ones that deal with dispositions on this survey. And so I target which ones, and they related to effective teaching. L, qualitatively scaled choices. I have a Likert scale with distinguishing descriptors. My construct validity is 0.85. My instrument reliability is 0.96. My response rate is 44%. That beats the 20%. Here under representative, I have all ITP programs, included except BAE, special education, 2017 to 2020. It's because that program was just started last year. And so here at the bottom, I put 16 out of 17 criteria met. It's 94%. So in a snapshot, I've got the analysis of how the assessment meets the criteria. And in my chart, I have this for every single assessment that we use. So it allows me to make sure as the assessment coordinator that where I have problems with my assessment and where I might need to go back and fix it, I'm okay with these opinion items in this section. I know they're there, I'm aware of it, and I'm okay with it. If I had maybe 20 out of 30 opinion items, I might be less comfortable with that, right? So I think having a chart like this helps you to analyze where your strengths and weaknesses are with your assessments. The other thing I wanted to show you, I'm going to stop sharing this for a moment and share with you the annotation that I do. If I can find it, I'm not terribly skilled at finding things when I'm looking for them. Let's see. I want to show you the annotation I did, and I did pull it up before this meeting. Here we go. So this is what the annotation looks like. Can you see this? So what you see is, this is our exit survey for initial teacher preparation programs. And what I've done is use the comment feature and annotated it, and you'll see, here's the purpose of our survey. The purpose of the survey initiated by Rowan is to evaluate the effectiveness of its initial teacher education licensure programs. We're interested in learning about the perception of the level of preparedness and effectiveness of our completers as they graduate, to inform program innovations and improvements, and to ensure their role in schools and communities' needs. We'll use the data to demonstrate to the institution, stakeholders, and accreditors that the work we do is making a difference. Consequently, it's of the utmost importance that you take a moment and return the survey with your candid responses. So I've given the purpose of the survey, and I put K here because this is actionable feedback. This is how I'm going to use it, how I'm going to take action with it. So these letters refer back to that chart, that template that we just looked at. So here we've got instructions. In considering the survey, please use the following indicators to guide your response. G, clear levels of proficiency. So here, strong. The beginning teacher is very knowledgeable and skilled for a teacher and requires very little support, guidance, and mentoring. You're confident in applying this knowledge or skill and do so on a consistent basis. This item is a demonstrated strength. And then beginning, I'm not going to read all of this to you, but the beginning teacher demonstrates awareness and some understanding and progression of knowledge and skills appropriate for a beginning teacher, but needs coaching, guidance, and mentoring, demonstrating some weakness as competencies are emerging. The knowledge or skills identified are known to you, but you use them infrequently during your practice. So what I've tried to do here with these is to define it for the candidate in a way that they can distinguish whether it's a strength for them, whether they're competent beginning, or whether it's weak. And it's in a qualitative term, and it's easily distinguishable. So I go through, here's more directions, check one box per row. Here's my alignment to standards. So I've gone through this whole assessment and I've annotated it and how each of those items connects. Now, I don't think you need to do this to every assessment, but I think if you do it to one or two, plus provide the table that we just looked at, it will demonstrate that you know how to analyze your assessments and ensure that you're meeting these really important criteria, if that makes sense. The survey, the exit survey, that's being filled out by the candidates who leave the program. So as they graduate, they complete that survey before they their last semester. How do you determine that the response is not just opinion of the candidate? Because, well, I'm asking them to base their response on their skills, knowledge. I should put that back up and show you the ones that I think are opinions. And then we'll move on. So let me put that one back up. So these I believe are not just opinions, they're rating their abilities. But then down here, I asked them, provide up to 3 areas where you would judge graduates to be most capable and where they would need additional preparation. I think those are more opinion questions than the ones where they're assessing their own knowledge, skills, and dispositions. I think you could say that any survey is opinion, but I think there is a distinction between judging or self-reflecting on your skills and then providing an opinion about the strengths and weaknesses of a program. So that's how I distinguish between the two. But I'd like to share with you and maybe have a conversation about, let's see, let's start with this one. I think we have 10 minutes before questions and answers. So here is an assessment that I came across during a CAEP visit that I was a reviewer on. And this is a sample teacher education internship evaluation. So please, I'd love for you to make comments about what you think is strong or weak using the criteria that we talked about. So we've got instructions and we've got criteria. Any thoughts about what you can see so far? Anybody?
People are putting their answers in the chat.
Melissa,
Oh, I'm sorry.
we
Please
have
share out
two
loud. Can we let's have a conversation if you don't mind.
we have 2 responses,
Yes.
or at least 3 responses, 4 responses. No actionability, criteria are not clearly defined. I think criteria need more explanation, I think it was, and not much of a purpose.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is one that is used now at a major university with candidates. And so one of my feedback comments to them was it does not meet CAEP criteria for a lot of the reasons that you've said. And we're just looking at the top bit of it. So yeah, first of all, and please talk because I can't read the chat and I would much rather have a conversation with you. But so
well, they're saying it's defined for summative, but you could use it for formative, but it's really for summative, but it could be, you know. Yeah.
Right.
And then
It's
Miriam,
confusing here, right?
yeah.
Is it for formative? Is it for summative? Is it for both? And it's okay if you use it for both, right? Because we use the same assessment for midterm and final, but it should be clearer here, right?
Correct.
And who completes it? Do we know? Is it the supervisor? Is it the cooperating teacher? When is it done?
We don't know.
You have another issue, and that is where it says 1 or 2, 3 or 4. Each of those is a separate level. So what's the difference?
Exactly.
What's the difference between a 1 and a 2? And why would you get a 2 if it's unacceptable?
Right. Yeah.
And what's the difference between a 3 and a 4?
And my concern would be, can you give a 2.5? Can you give a 3.5?
Well, if you can give a 2, you might as well give a 2.5.
And just even the language, you know, using unacceptable versus acceptable. I think there needs to be a little bit more elaboration on what does that look like, you know, because what may be acceptable to me may not be acceptable to someone else.
Exactly. So we have no definition of what this looks like. What does acceptable look like? What does unacceptable look like? And what is a high level? What does that look like? Right? So we have really no indicators that would make this reliable if 4 of you were scoring the same student. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. And it really looks more like a survey And when you're observing a student teacher, you should observe behaviors rather than do a Likert scale. You know, the behaviors should be defined.
Right. So here's the beginning of it. So we can.
Yeah, there's another issue, and that's a Likert issue that I always have. But the issue is that if you have a 5-point or a 7-point scale and somebody's unsure, they're going to click in the middle.
Yep, they're always going to.
And that's acceptable. And that's acceptable. So they'll just click 3s all the way down and that's it.
You're absolutely right. Or, you know, oh, they're kind of good. I'm just going to give them a 4, or I'm just going to give them a 2. I don't want to give them a 1. I don't want to say they're acceptable. So I'm just going to go with the 2 or the 4.
Right.
This is an easy default on this particular scale, right? What do you think about these statements, the indicators or the items?
Well, I think they do not define the behavior in great detail, and it would be very hard for a cooperating teacher or a university supervisor to give feedback to the candidate as what she or he did or did not do.
Is it actionable?
It's not actionable.
Yeah.
That's the part that's missing, right?
And there's no room for comment to give actionable feedback.
No, it's not actionable for the candidate or for the program.
Right.
There's nothing the program could take away from this for continuous improvement either.
Right, other than know what the actual, numerical rating would be, which doesn't really tell you a lot because we haven't clearly defined that.
No. So here's the next section, communicating effectively. This is a little bit more demonstrative.
Right. I like the language in the first bullet, demonstrates rapport empathy with appropriate constituencies, in the internship experience. I mean, I'm hoping then that there's been some training or some developmental experiences that the interns have been exposed to with respect to developing rapport and empathy. But then I see things down like for example, the bullet 3 there, intern displays attitude of a professional. So that's one where I would really want to know specifically what does that look like? Exactly. Yeah. What am I looking for there?
Right. What am I looking for? And then here's the next set, which is the importance of inquiry.
By doing what?
I know, right?
Again, there's just such a lack of clarification or identification of these clear behaviors or these clear actions. Without that, honestly, I think this becomes less of a true judgment or evaluation and much more into the realm of opinion, which is not what we want.
No. So I'm going to stop sharing this because you're getting the gist of this one. And I'm going to share another one with you. I think it's helpful to look at these and maybe you can see some of the things that you've seen in the past in some of your colleagues' work or some of the ones that you might have written even yourself. I think it's helpful to look at these, and especially with these traits in mind. Now you can see how important it is to have some of these characteristics.
Melissa, we have 2 minutes before the questions and answers, although this is very important.
I'm very aware. I'm just going to share a couple of things from this one, Anna Maria, and then we'll move on. So this is a formative assessment for an advanced program, and this is a principles program. So we've got a huge introduction here, which I'm going to scroll through so we can start looking at the expectations. So here we have met and not met. Anna Maria, you're shaking your head.
That will not work.
No. So
Yeah,
are they
there's-
prompt or are they not prompt? Are they professional in
There's
appearance or are they not?
Maybe they're emerging, maybe.
Yeah,
they're
I would
happy
put
there.
another column that says in progress.
Yes. And this goes along with that, Miriam. We've got competencies here like environmental awareness. Now here we can assess emerging, proficient, not observed.
Okay,
And then at the end of the semester, they either met it or they haven't.
okay.
But do we know what emerging, proficient, and developing look like? And what's the other problem here?
Melissa, I don't know if this is specifically what you're thinking about, but I'm just wondering, you know, as a person who might be rating this, am I both assessing their progress and am I also providing an end of semester status? Is this
Yeah.
happening at two different times? Is this actually happening at the same time? I'm confused because I don't know when I see that little section right there,
Right.
what I'm supposed to do as the rater.
Right. And how many things are listed here? In each box, you've got a number of
Right.
items.
Right,
And
that
so-
totally violates your single stem, you know, indicator, right?
Because if I click proficient, I'm saying they're proficient in all of these.
And you have another issue, and I'm looking at some of these, and I want to know, particularly the second one that says global perspective, I want to know how that kicks back to the school.
Yes,
The way it's written, I mean, it's real nice to have a global awareness, but if it doesn't impact how you are as a school leader, why?
right, right.
I'm sorry, I should keep my mouth closed.
No, that's what we're doing, Miriam. We're discussing. Look at this communication.
Wow, there's a lot of commingling there, as,
A
as Kate
lot.
would say.
And what do you not see here? There's no standards
No,
that are tied to any of this. So why are these important? What are they relevant to?
I don't know. They
Neither
should be-
do I.
It should be NELP, but there is no NELP standards.
Yeah, there are professional standards for principals.
Sure, NELP.
But they're not here.
And New Jersey has their own.
That's right. So I'm going to stop sharing. I hope that, I know I threw a lot at you at one time, and I apologize because I know it was a lot of information. But I hope that the information plus looking at a couple examples helped you to conceptualize a little bit about how the characteristics coupled with the examples and thinking about doing it in annotation plus a chart may help you in asserting that your assessments are valid, reliable, and have the right criteria that they need to accomplish your goals. So Anna Maria, I am ready for questions now.
Okay.
And I think I hit it at
We
3:30.
are open for questions. I don't see any questions in the chat. Does anybody have a question that you want to present to Melissa? Unmute yourself and I'll be able to recognize you or raise your hand.
Melissa,
Yes, Miriam. Miriam.
Yeah, I just have a couple of questions, and they're things that have always bothered me, and it's not from your presentation. Your presentation reinforces it. I'll call measure things such as dispositions. Those are, I still have a hard time saying you are this or you are that, or you rate this way. They're very subjective. That's the word I'm looking for. They're very subjective. And I have the same issue with exit surveys for our students, that they're very subjective. It's your opinion of what you think you got out of it.
Yeah.
So it worries me sometimes whether those are valid or they're not valid. I guess that's the question.
Or the comment. Yeah, I don't disagree with you at all. I think they do need to be taken with a grain of salt. And that's why I think we need to triangulate them with other kinds of data, right? So if students, for example, are saying, I'll give you one from Rowan. Our students, our alumni, were saying that, and our exit surveys were revealing that our students were struggling with connecting to families and communities. And our alumni surveys were more strongly indicating that as an area of weakness than our exit surveys were. And so we looked at our programs, and especially in the secondary programs, they don't get a lot of training and work in connecting with families and communities. And so in and of itself, the survey, it alludes to something, but if you triangulate it with other data that you have, it begins to take on meaning. And then you can say, is this really an area of weakness? Is this something we really should look at? And I think that's what's important. Does that make sense?
That's an excellent point. Yeah.
Yeah. And so it might point you in a trajectory where you might want to dig a little bit deeper, and start looking at, is this really an area? Or, at the previous institution I was in, our surveys were indicating, in our disposition surveys, that students were struggling with diversity and adjusting instruction for students' needs. And when we looked at that data, and we looked at scores that students, they had a diversity course, but it was front-loaded at the very beginning of the program. And what we discovered was it was too early. They weren't ready for that information. And so when we looked at everything and we moved the course to later, after they had some field work and were able to see what was happening in the classrooms with diverse learners and special needs learners, it clicked better for them because they had the context. And so I think it leads you to question things. I don't think it gives you the answer, but it helps you, I think, to process things that you triangulate with other data.
That's very important. Amy, you had a question. Do you want to ask it?
Sure. I was just going to ask you a sort of a process question, because I can see that your checklist is very thorough and it's easy to identify, it makes it almost easy to identify, but then what's the next steps in real life? What do you do?
Yeah, the next steps in real life are where you have the red marks, going back to the assessment and thinking about, how do I want to revise this assessment? Do I want to revise this assessment? Are my directions unclear? The two assessments that we looked at, if I had filled out, and had I more time, we would have filled out this chart for one of those assessments. And then we would have seen, hopefully, red areas that we would go back and rework those assessments, the purpose, the instructions, the basis for judgment. Those all need work. But the chart helps us to identify where those weaknesses are. And then if you have an assessment team, they could do this to a program-based assessment and send it back to the team and say, hey, look, these are some areas that you need to really think about. These are recommendations that the assessment committee has, or as a program, you could have them teach them what these criteria are and have them self-assess. So I think what's important is that when you're developing EPP created assessments, that you're cognizant of these different aspects. And before you actually pilot or use an assessment, you kind of go through these checklists, either as an assessment committee that goes back to the program, or as a program that you go through this checklist and just see how your assessment measures up, or your key assignment. Does that make sense?
Yeah, so just
Mhm.
being really clear about the expectations. Yeah, I guess my question, I mean, it's just, I've had the experience of going back and trying to explain the changes that need to be made, and faculty saying, no, it's fine.
Yeah, it's not. But if you can,
They're
and I
happy
think,
with it.
I think it starts with showing them a bad one and why it's bad, and one that they're not attached to. Because once they get personally attached to it, then they don't want to change it. But if you show them, you know, like the two I showed you, and we talk about what's wrong with it and why it's wrong and why you're not going to get reliable scoring from it, then they're more willing to understand why these are important. And then they can apply it to their own. But I think the first step is starting from one that's a little bit distanced and not so good.
Point. That's an excellent point. I know we have run out of time, and this is very unfortunate because this has been a wonderful, wonderful workshop.
Thank you.
And we want to thank Dr. Awenowicz for their presentation, and the questions that you have about dispositions. I encourage you to come to our next assessment day, which is the 31st, and at 2:00, and we have a wonderful panel talking about the assessments of dispositions. And so I've heard these two women before, and I think you would really enjoy them and ask the right questions. So again, Melissa, thank you so much for being with us. And thank you all for being such a great audience. Have a
Thank
great
you,
evening.
Anna Maria, and thank all of you for attending. I truly appreciate it.
It was a great presentation, and we learned a lot. Are those slides going to be available for us, Amy?
Sure, yep, if Melissa sends them to me, I'll put together a message with materials, yep.
Would you also like the poor examples?
I think some people might, yeah.
You could use them with your faculty.
Thank you.
Sadly, we can all find them on our own.
I'm sure you have plenty of examples of your own.
Yeah, just make sure you white out the names of the
I've
institutions.
already done that, don't worry.
Okay. Well,
Okay,
thank you. Thank you,
Have a
Anna
great
Maria.
day.
Thank you, Melissa.
thank you all.
Bye.
Thank you, Amy, and thank you, Melissa.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, Anna Maria.
Thank you.
Take care.
Bye-bye.
Was that okay?
Oh, it was great, Melissa. It was really wonderful.
Are you
Really
sure?
wonderful. How long have you been at Rowan?
Only for a year and a half, but
Oh, they're lucky to have you. And you
Thank
have
you.
a visit in 10 days.